and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show. We're so glad that you could join us today. We are brought to you, as always, by progressivechristianity.org. Wonderful organization, a place to get all your progressive Christian resources and to learn more about progressive Christianity. Hope you'll follow them on social media, and we hope that you will subscribe to the Moonshine Jesus Show wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we're talking about Percy Jackson and the Olympians. It ought to be a lot of fun, but if you haven't seen it, we've got to let you know that there will be spoilers. I am joined, as always, by the one and only Mark Sandlin. How you doing today, Mark?
I'm doing great, man. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. Ready to talk about Percy Jackson, but before we do,
Yes.
I know that we're going to need some drinks. You got one?
Absolutely. I do. Well, I figured we're talking about the gods here. The nectar of the gods is ambrosia. So I went online. I found several, and I mean several, recipes for ambrosia. But the one I went with is coconut rum, orange juice, pineapple juice, and a little bit of grenadine. And then I rimmed it with some silver stars for the gods.
Oh, I like that.
How about you?
Yeah,
What'd you end up going with?
Ambrosia. So I was inspired by one of the main elements of this series, which is Zeus's lightning bolt. And so I've got a drink here called Zeus's lightning bolt. It's It's 3 parts Southern Comfort, 1 part Amaretto, 2 parts Sour Mix, and 6 parts Sprite. So there it is.
Delicious.
Yes, Zeus's lightning bolt. Cheers to you, Mark.
Cheers, sir. Oh, yeah, that's good.
Is that good, sweet ambrosia?
Zeus's
lightning bolt. Oh, you might. Yeah, maybe throughout the course of the show, if things go well.
I can guarantee it. Yeah.
All right, let's have a sip. Let's come back after the drop.
Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Welcome back to the Geek Out segment of our show. We're going to spend just a little bit of time, allowing the inner geeks in us out to enjoy talking about Percy Jackson a little bit, but we promise we're going to move straight on pretty quickly into some theological and political points that kind of are brought up by this show. But for those of you who aren't familiar, Percy Jackson and the Olympians is based on a very popular young adults book series, and it follows 12-year-old Percy Jackson, who turns out to be half human, half god child of Poseidon, also known as a half-blood. And he is caught up in a journey across the U.S. to return Zeus's master bolt, which we already have a drink themed after, and stop an all-out war, basically. All of this while outrunning monsters and outwitting gods with the help of his 2 new friends, Annabeth, who is the half-blood daughter of Athena, the goddess of strategy and war, and Grover, who is his half-man, half-goat guardian. And so, it's just basically your typical story about a teenage demigod trying to stop a war between the gods and save the world and his mother. Pretty straightforward stuff here.
That's right. That old story. I've heard it a million times.
Story. Yeah. Everyone knows this so well.
That's right. Yeah.
So overall, I'm curious, what did you think about Percy Jackson? And then after you've told me what you think about it, I'm also curious about what in the show series, it was 8 episodes.
8 episodes.
Did you think worked the best for you? And what was kind of the thing that maybe didn't work so well for you?
Yeah, so I didn't know much about Percy Jackson. As we talked about last week, I knew that there was a movie that wasn't received so well. But I didn't watch it, and I wasn't familiar with the young adult novel or anything like that. So I went into this pretty fresh. It took me a little while to get into it. This wasn't one that grabbed me right away, but I found myself by the 3rd episode or so getting pretty invested in the
Yeah.
characters. And I'll tell you what I think it was for me is I do think that Greco-Roman mythology is really interesting, and so I think what grabbed me was the more that the gods were brought into it, and the less it felt kind of, I think, um, uh, maybe young adult fantasy-esque and
Right.
more Greco-Roman myth.
Mhm.
That was something that I found interesting. I think as far as the series, what worked well was once we hit the road, and it
Mm.
became a road adventure, a road trip kind of adventure on the quest. That was the
Yeah.
part that really started to grab me, and where we were going places and doing some things. That was something that I found interesting and that worked for me. How about you,
Right.
Mark? Did it grab you? What worked for you or didn't
Yeah,
work?
I was kind of in the same boat as you almost. I also was not familiar. I had watched the movie and was quite underwhelmed by the movie.
Mhm,
And I think that was a Christopher Columbus movie, which is really strange that it was so underwhelming.
mhm.
Um, but and I wasn't familiar with the books at all. But I wasn't as familiar with Greek gods and everything as you probably were. They never captured my imagination that much. I knew enough about them. I kind of knew the major ones and some of the stories behind them. But I really liked this series. It's kind of fun. There's nothing, over the top, nothing too intense. There's
Mhm.
not an overly complicated storyline, even though I kind of made fun of the storyline in introducing it, but it's not really particularly overcomplicated. So
Yep.
I really ended up liking it. I liked it enough that at least my interest in reading the books has been piqued now. Maybe I will, because
Uh-huh.
I've always enjoyed young adult sci-fi
Yeah.
fantasy books just because they're
Uh-huh.
nice, light reads and you kind of can get lost in them real quickly.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that. As far as what worked for me,
Yeah.
it's sort of similar to what you were saying, like when they hit the road. But I think
Yeah.
the reason that worked for me was the trio. So it's sort of like a buddy movie at that
Mhm,
point.
mhm. Yes.
That trio worked so well together. They play off each other great. There's a
They did.
chemistry
Yep.
there. You
Yep.
immediately want to be a part of their group. You want to kind of
Mhm.
join them along for this trip. And so that's what worked for me in particular. Was I thought that was just the casting on that was fantastic in terms of the chemistry between the three. A lot of fun to watch. I think the thing that maybe didn't work for me much, and I don't know, maybe it's just the English major in me. A lot of times the dialogue just felt kind of like,
It's stilted.
yeah, it just wasn't. It's like, oh god, I was into it right until you that line, and
Yeah.
or why are you like, don't tell me about it, show me, or there were things
Yeah.
like that. But in general, I really did. Well, you were talking about how you were kind of into the Greco-Roman world and
Yep.
particularly the gods. I'm curious because I really am not that deeply knowledgeable about it. Do you think that in this show they could have spent a little more time exploring kind of the Greek mythos, or I mean, would it have helped the story, or did they miss an opportunity, or would have distracted? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that we don't necessarily have a ton of knowledge about Greco-Roman mythology, even though it's often a part of kind of school curriculum, high
Early,
school
early,
curriculum, that I don't
yeah.
think a lot of people have a lot of knowledge about how that really works, or the difference between Greek and Roman gods. I think there's a lot of confusion about that. I think that they helped us to navigate like the big three and helped us to understand their relationship with to one another. And I do think we got some interesting exploration of how Greco-Roman gods are portrayed, and I
Hmm.
thought that was interesting. But yeah, I think it would have been helpful to know a little bit more, say, about Kronos. And let's if Kronos is going to be our big bad, why should we be afraid of Kronos?
Right.
I think we didn't get a lot of explanation about that if we're not real familiar with these myths. I think also we don't get a lot of insight into why the gods might be afraid of demigods, why it is that they might want to be keeping their distance from them and humans. We got a few explanations here and there, but again, if these are going to be the people that we're afraid of, I think they need to give us a little bit more reason to be afraid of the gods. So did you feel like they explored it adequately?
Yeah, you hit a couple of the things that I wasn't sure, because like, again, I said I went through the normal what you learn in school, but it didn't fascinate me enough that I went and dove deeper into it. I 100% think we needed more on Kronos. That I think he could have been significantly more frightening and of a threat than what he is currently, if we had more background. As for, Poseidon and Zeus, I kind of thought, I wouldn't have mind having more, but I'm not sure, outside of kind of the educational value of it, what it would have added or not. So I wasn't ever quite sure. And I was curious from a person who maybe had a little more background in it. Another question I'm curious about, this is basically your hero's quest story. Did you see anything more than that going on here, or is this really truly just a young adult's hero's quest? Was there any other kind of depth to it besides a straightforward, hero's journey?
Well, I thought one of the interesting things that we got in the show was a real struggle, some with identity and about what it means to kind of be ostracized and to kind of come into who you are. And I think they were trying to deal with some kind of social issues broadly in there. And I think we see that like ADHD and daydreaming and stuff. They say that the gods' brains process things differently, and so these are not a deficit, but these are things that really are an advantage to you. And so I think we saw some struggle with identity. I don't know that we really, I guess I don't know that I felt like there was really that much at stake for Percy. I mean, we got to see him in his boarding school for like half of one episode, and then so I'm not sure I really got to feel the suffering that Percy was experiencing before he discovered that he was a demigod, and not just a demigod, but one who could slay a mentor with no practice whatsoever. So a pretty special one at that. So there's a little bit of that. What did you see going on, Mark? Did you see?
No, I really think it. No, I really think it's just basically a hero's quest story. I do like that they took very seriously that it was a teen that was going through this hero's quest. So the challenges and obstacles that the teen has to overcome reflected a lot of modern day's challenges and obstacles, some of which you were bringing up, which I really liked that twist on it. But beyond that, I don't think they did much more other than just tell a hero's quest story, which, we talked before about, I really do think that sometimes we need to just let something be fun. And it doesn't have to be high-end, incredible. And that's what this was. And that's what hero quest stories are. They're just fun. You can analyze them to death and talk about all kinds of ways of how they're unhealthy, and they teach unhealthy things, and they don't, not realistic based on what life is really like. But sometimes they're just fun. And this one was
fun.
It was fun the whole time. It was entertaining. You stayed engaged. Well, it's talking about staying engaged. What did you think of Percy Jackson, the character? Was it an engaging character for you? Was he a character that inspired you? Would you follow him? Would you follow him into battle against gods?
I think I would follow Annabeth into battle.
She's sharp as crap.
She was. She knew her stuff. I liked Percy. I thought the actor was great. I mean, he was pretty charismatic. He was fun to watch and funny, and I thought that added a lot to the show. So I think it was interesting how sometimes Percy seemed to be an expert on Greco-Roman mythology, and at other times he didn't seem like he knew anything about it. And the same for Annabeth and Grover, that at times they were experts on everything, and at times things that seems like they should have known Percy had to explain to them, which was confusing. But I think that I think that as a whole, I think he was a compelling character to watch. I enjoyed watching him, and as you noted earlier, I think particularly when he was paired with Annabeth and Grover, that was a fun trio to watch. And I don't think that even though the odds were stacked against them, I think it was clear they were going to accomplish their quest in some way, even if it wasn't by the solstice, that they were still going to accomplish their quest. Did you feel compelled? Did you want to watch Percy?
I wanted to be around Percy, but I don't know that I had instilled. I don't know that I had instilled in me. If we've got to take the God Zone, this is the guy to do it.
This is the guy.
I mean, he won a lot of battles. And if you think back on it, almost every battle he did win was around water. The Minotaur, it was raining. In the capture the flag game, he finally won the battle when he was right up against the lake. Beats Ares when he's right next to the ocean and causes a. So, I mean, if you had seen that and figured that out, then maybe you'd feel inspired to go in. But I don't think most common you wouldn't have just picked that out. I got one more question real quickly to squeeze in here. I've heard that there are folks who are really pretty upset about the show not following the book closely enough. Even though the author Rick Riordan was on the set and he approved any and all changes to the storyline. My question is actually more general, though. What are your thoughts about how closely cinema should follow the books that they're based on?
Yeah, so I think this is an interesting question that you always have to deal with whenever you're adapting a story from one medium to another, no matter which way that is going. And I think it's important to recognize that they are different mediums, and some things work in print that don't work visually. And I think you have to make adjustments. There are just some stories that you can't tell in quite the same way. With that being said, you can also take too much artistic license and drift too far away from the story to a point that you wonder, is this even really inspired by the other book? So I think it's an art, right? It's an art to figure out exactly where the balance is on that and what's going to make the strongest visual medium. Do you have opinions, Mark? I know that you've done a lot of film study, a lot of.
No, I think you stated it. I think you stated it really well. It comes down to how beloved is the book. And if it's particularly beloved and you want to have a successful movie, follow it closely enough. But I do think that we've hit a time in the last 5 years or so where the internet has just gone nuts and people just look for the thing that they can yell and scream about. And any variation causes them to just lose their minds. And if they sat down long enough, they'd realize, this is actually serving a better purpose than the way it was done in the book to put it up on screen visually. So yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think it's an art, but I think there are some rules you can follow pretty well about how beloved is it. Am I changing the main character? Am I changing secondary characters? Am I changing the overall storyline severely, or am I changing it so that we can speed the story up enough to get to the conclusion? Yeah, it's a tricky thing for sure, but I do think that there's a lot of fans out there who really lost their minds. Need to just reel it back in a little bit. Enjoy it. I mean, look, you already know the story in the book. Now you get another version of that. It's new, it's fresh. Enjoy that. I don't know. All right, listen, we could talk a little more about that. I certainly have even stronger feelings about it. But we need to move on and get into our theopolitical segment. So we'll take a quick drop and catch you all on the other side.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. Thanks for letting us geek out for a little bit. It's just not as much fun if we don't let our geek flags fly a little bit, is it, Mark?
Yeah,
We've
I
got to
agree.
geek out. Yeah,
Absolutely.
but we are also people who are really interested in theology and politics, and this is our Theopolitico segment. And Mark, I think since this is pretty heavy on theology, the gods and all, I want to lean into that a little bit this segment. So
Right.
we find out that demigods are, of course, part human, part divine. Wait, I thought that started with Jesus. I thought
With
no.
you,
Oh no! Wait, it didn't. Did it? Wait. Okay.
No,
wait.
they
Mark,
probably copied him. They probably copied him retroactively.
Oh, that's probably right. Yes. Yeah. They went back in time. And okay, so
They are gods after all. They
are gods. They can just rewrite things.
They can travel in time. See. Oh, look at this Jesus guy. Look what he's doing. Kind of
Yeah,
like that half god, half
Yeah,
first human
let's
thing.
go back.
That's a good way of doing it. We're gonna try it. Yeah.
Okay, just kidding. Obviously,
Right.
that
Massively
Christianity has, has kind of portrayed Jesus as this interesting kind of fully human, fully divine character, but like that's very common in other places. But I want to know, Mark, how do we navigate and understand Jesus's relation to gods? To God or gods, or
Right.
and how does that relate to like demigods or other myths in other cultures?
Right. Well, I mean, for me, in Jesus, what we have is a person who has one of the fullest understandings of what God is and how we relate to God and how to be in communion with God. It so much so that he would communicate that on some level that he and God are one and the same, but he also believed that you and God are one and the same, and that your neighbor and even your enemy are one and the same. And so I personally have a lot of problems with the fully human, fully God, because the fully God part for me is we would call it problematic. So if I'm supposed to follow the teachings of this Jesus character, right? But he's fully God. What are the odds that I'm ever going to be able? Because I can promise you,
that's going to be hard.
It's going to be really difficult, and I'm not. But if he is a human who has come to this kind of understanding, deep knowledge, and this sort of elevated spirituality, well, that's very hopeful. I can at least attempt to move towards that and live into it. In general, I don't like that language that we have hung onto so dearly for so long as the Christian church. But I also just don't think it's real heavily biblical. I mean, there's hints that if you read it the right way, you can say, well, isn't that what that's saying? But my answer is no, that's not actually what it's saying. I mean, how do you feel about the whole thing and the relationship between Jesus and God and who Jesus really was?
Yeah, I also find that deeply problematic. And I love the way that Borg talks about it, the very similar way to the way that you were just describing, Marcus Borg, saying that there have been a number of spirit people throughout history, people who have been more in tune to the divine. Lao Tzu or Confucius or the Buddha or Jesus or Muhammad, Baha'u'llah, a number of spiritual teachers, Gandhi, King, people who have been more in tune to what this divine source beyond us, this luminous web is doing, and how that and they can teach us from that. And so I find that to be a much more helpful way of thinking about things. And I
Mhm.
think we can still acknowledge that maybe there are other people who have had a relationship to God like that without that
Right.
hurting our commitment as like people who consider ourselves to be Jesus followers.
Yeah.
That I don't think that's mutually exclusive. And I think
Mhm.
the church would be in a better place if uh, we stop deifying Jesus and we're more willing to actually try to follow his teachings. So,
John. I blame John.
John, yes.
Really blame John for that.
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with John, the Gospel of John, because for a long time I really, really hated the Gospel of John, honestly.
Right?
And so back to Borg, in meeting Jesus again for the first time, he talks about how he felt betrayed by the author of the Gospel of John because
Mhm.
a lot of the stuff that he said just wasn't historical, right? I mean, where he
Right.
gives us
Yeah.
this high Christology where Jesus is more divine. And he said that really screwed me up, and it screwed up a lot of the church. And
It's true.
and then he said, but I realized that wasn't the point of the Gospel of John to give
Right.
a historic that it's a poetic statement about Jesus. There are other problems in it, but I have
There
a
are.
love-hate relationship with that. Do you love it or hate it, Mark?
I still mostly hate it.
Yeah.
I think I like a lot of the parables when you isolate them. I really like
Yeah.
they're told really well. Some good storytelling going on
Yeah.
there. In fairness, I don't hate the Gospel of John as much as I hate how easily it is misconstrued to make Jesus a god. That's what I really hate.
Yeah, and the passion narrative. If we could get rid of the passion narrative in the Gospel of
Yes,
John, I
please.
think we would be much better
So
off
much better off.
theologically. But
100%.
so as we move
You're right.
into Lent, if we could just avoid John, that would be all wonderful.
Absolutely.
So I think demigods are interesting, Mark, and so we got a lot to talk about demigods, and we talked about how they're kind of half human, half god. But demigods are called half-bloods, as you mentioned earlier, and they're treated as sort of second-class citizens, not really accepted by the human world because they can kind of see beyond the magic of the realm. They're not
Right.
really treated as gods because they're not full gods. And so that reminded me in the Gospels of the Samaritans, right? Samaria was
Right.
kind of this place that was seen as people of half breed, half blood by the Judeans. And so I wonder, Mark, do you see any parallels with that today? You see any half blood parallels anywhere in the United States?
Well, one of the things about calling someone a half blood or that kind of thing is that you're essentially dehumanizing them. You're trying to make them something so other that you can have more negative thoughts about them than you might want to have about someone that you believe is equal to you in some way. And
Yeah.
so I think in particular where we see that, particularly in the United States, is at the border. Language is used so much, calling people who are crossing, cockroaches or rats or all kinds of things to try to dehumanize them, to make them sound like and be thought of as somehow less than and not deserving the same treatment that most humans and human rights would demand for them. So like most immediately, that's where it comes off for me. Of course, we're lowering them rather than raising them above, like a demigod is somewhere between gods and humans. And when we now try to dehumanize people, we tend to want to make them less than so that we can feel superior and feel like, I deserve things that they don't deserve.
Of course, I think most Americans kind of see ourselves as gods, don't we? And other people as maybe maybe human down there. And so I think this dehumanization that you're talking about is going to be real important in the coming months as we're going up to this
There's
election.
no doubt.
I keep thinking, Mark, about Trump in 2016 and in 2020, and the way that anyone who disagreed with him was dehumanized. Anyone who had any
Yep.
kind of difference was dehumanized. But I think you're particularly right about the people at the border. That, man, did we see a lot of dehumanization.
Horrible
People
rhetoric.
who weren't seen as even fully human. And so I think that clearly that's antithetical to the gospel. Hey, so here's a question I've got for you, Mark.
Okay.
A theological question I need to know the answer to. So when Percy learns,
You might be asking the wrong person if you need the answer.
I need the answer to this, Mark. I have to have it, because this is something that just struck me as really odd.
Okay,
in the
I'm
course
curious.
of this. So when Percy learns that his father is a god,
Yeah.
he specifically mentions Jesus. His mom says, "Your father's a god," and he's like, "What, like Jesus?"
Oh, I forgot all about that. Yeah.
And his mom says, "Not God, a god." So I'm curious, Mark, where does that put God, like Yahweh, like the Judeo-Christian God, in the pantheon of Greco-Roman gods? If all of these other gods are just gods, but they're not God. They're just some gods. You know, is that
You know what?
making a comment
I could be
on
really
Yahweh?
snarky about this. But you know what? I'm going to actually go with my theological answer to this.
Okay.
That if there are other gods, if there are Greek gods,
Mhm.
that yes, they're not Yahweh. Yahweh is the source, the stuff that all things are made of, including other gods. We are all a wave in the ocean and dripping with the wetness of God. So, of course, other gods are made up of or consist of or are an image of Yahweh. So Yahweh would have to be above them, right?
So I think that Steve Myers, I love that. Steve Myers raises an interesting point about council of gods. And so I think that this is fascinating because we like to think of the Judeo-Christian tradition as monotheistic, right?
Yep.
We often claim that Judaism is the first monotheistic religion, but it's like not as monotheistic as a lot of people think, because there were like a council of God, like a royal court, and like
it's right there in Genesis. It's right there in Genesis. Let us make them in our image.
Yes, and it's not Trinitarian, right, Mark?
No, it's nowhere close to Trinitarian.
So I think here in the show, I think it's playing to American culture, right? They can't. It's like, oh, you can't
100%.
talk about you can't talk about gods unless they all report ultimately to
our
big
God.
guy. Yeah, we can't have a show in America that's about gods that aren't the God.
That's
hey,
right.
Look, I have a million more theological
No
questions,
doubt.
just because I really want to geek out about theology, but you know what? If we do, we won't get to the make me look stupid segment, and
we can't have
gotta
that.
get there. No, it's not the Moonshine Jesus show without that segment. So why don't we take a quick break? We'll come back and we'll try to make each other look stupid.
Hello and welcome to our Make Me Look Stupid segment. And in this segment, we like to try to stump our co-host, or at least ask a question we don't know the answer to in hopes that maybe they can enlighten us. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with my question right off the bat. Near the end of the final episode, Percy has a dream, and Kronos shows up at the door of his mom's beach house. And in that conversation, you kind of pick up on, even though Kronos is the big bad through all of this, Kronos wants to make sure that Percy survives. Why do you think it's important to Kronos, the big bad, to have the hero of the story stick around, other than the fact that he wants to get paid for season 2? Other than that.
Oh, well, he says that Percy is an integral part of his plan. So is he planning to frame Percy a second time for a similar story arc the second season? I think that's what's going to happen. I think that he's going to try and manipulate Percy. I think that one of the things that we see at the kind of at the end is the Chiron mentioning to Percy that a part of this kind of makes sense to him, an anger towards the gods. And even though ultimately Percy got to connect with his father Poseidon, they didn't really get any kind of emotional attachment or any kind of the strengthening of their relationship. So I think we're going to see in the second season Percy struggle with what his relationship with the gods needs to be, even more than he did in this season. And I think that temporarily Kronos is going to recruit him to his side. And I think that when he's talking about you being key, that Kronos thinks he's going to convert for good. But I think what we're going to see is him convert for a time, then have a realization that actually that his father and Zeus, Hades, they're on the right side against Kronos. That's what I think it's about. What do you think?
Well, I kind of backed into what it might be about. I was thinking about Luke talking about Kronos and saying, Kronos wants to take down the gods, and that's a good thing. We need to do that. And so I said, okay, so Kronos' main instinct, main point right now is take down the gods. I think that maybe in the first episode, we're going to get someone's a foretelling, a revelation of something that's going to say one of the half-blood children will destroy Olympia. And that Kronos is going to assume that is Percy, and that it's going to end up being someone else, maybe even Luke. I don't know. But that Percy's actually, by keeping him alive, Percy's going to actually prevent Olympus from being destroyed once he sorts out who it is that's supposed to destroy it and how it's going to be destroyed. It's a wild guess, just trying to back into it, but that's where I would go with it.
But I love whenever we take positions on things and then we're able to come back and say, well, Mark was right on that.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
And Caleb was way off. Okay, I've got a question for you.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I felt like I ended up really enjoying this season, actually. I had some issues with it, but I really enjoyed the season. One of the things, though, that I found frustrating was it felt like there were some plot holes that I didn't feel like ever really got filled in. And one of those for me was, as they're on their hero quest across the United States, they are causing a lot of chaos. The police think that they have crashed an Amtrak train. They think that they helped to blow up the arch in St. Louis. They're causing a lot of mischief. And it's so much so that they have to depend on Ares to help get them across the country to see Hermes, right? Because they're on wanted posters and they're on the news and stuff. So they go through, they complete their quest. How come they can go around and continue their life as usual? What happened to them being wanted criminals, Mark? How did they make peace with the authorities and not end up in jail?
Well, they're the children of gods. I'm assuming that there was some intervention of the gods to kind of make people gently forget exactly what happened. That's the only thing I can come up with, and that's just me needing to explain it away because you're exactly right. It makes no sense. There's another piece that makes no sense. So in the first episode, we see that Percy's learning all about the history of the gods, right?
Yeah.
One must assume he learns the history of the person who beheads Medusa, Perseus.
Mm-hmm.
And then he meets Medusa, even though a person who basically has his name took her head off way in. Like, I was sitting there going,
come on, Percy.
How does this timeline? This makes no sense.
The other thing I want to know while we're talking about it, is how do they know that the Empire State Building is the entrance to Mount Olympus?
I'm having to assume that's Annabeth, just that she knew like where one of her mom's centers was in the arch.
Yeah,
I don't know, but it's a good question.
Or maybe in Medusa's book where they like find the address.
There was something.
Maybe there was some instruction. If you find Lin-Manuel Miranda, follow him up to the Empire State Building. I don't know.
So what was your answer as to why they got away with it?
I genuinely did not know. I thought, well, I guess the in-universe explanation is, well, they must have used the magic of the realm to further obscure the stuff. But they didn't say that. They didn't explain it. The last we heard, they couldn't go anywhere because they need to be in fear of the authorities. And next thing you know, well, Percy's going back to school with his mom and just traveling around doing fine. I would have liked to have seen some more explanations to things, but ultimately I don't think it took away from the fun.
I don't either. It was still a lot of fun. So listen, we need to figure out what we're going to do next week. We're going to, in 2 weeks, Madam Web comes out.
Ooh, yeah.
But next week, I'm just not seeing a lot of new sci-fi or fantasy that's going around. Do you have any thoughts on what we could fill the gap in with?
Well, Madam Web, that's in the same universe as Venom, right?
It's supposed to be, yeah, the Sony Spider universe.
Okay, yeah. Well, we haven't ever talked about Venom on the Moonshine show. Should we watch that? It's a few years old, but everyone would have access to it. We could watch it, get ready for Madam Web, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. Would that be a fun show to do? I
think that would be a lot of fun. And on top of it, Venom 3, I'm pretty sure comes out at the end of this year. So we're kind of setting ourselves up.
Okay.
We could do Venom 2 some point in the future. Before Venom 3, we get them all in. We also might learn something about the universe that could play out well for Madam Web. I think this is a great plan.
I'm in. Okay. Venom
that's
next week.
Planned for next time. Well, listen, we are very appreciative of all of you who have either watched us live or are listening back on podcasts. You've stuck with us for a good 45 minutes. And you know what? I know sitting here listening to Caleb for 45 minutes is not the easiest thing to do.
It's not. It's torture.
And the same holds for me as well. But that just means we're even doubly appreciative of all of you who do tune into the show. You give us our reason for doing this, and we are very appreciative. So thank you. And until next time, we'll see you again on the Moonshine Jesus Show.
Moonshine Jesus.